Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to a new season of Adventures in Compliance. In this season, we are going to review the short stories which appeared in the Strand Magazine from July 1891 to June 1892 and were collected in the book The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Over the next 12 episodes, I will be reviewing each story and mine them for leadership, compliance, and ethical lessons. Today, we begin with A Scandal in Bohemia, in which the author introduced his famous detective character, Sherlock Holmes. The story was published in July 1891 and introduced the character of Irene Adler, a woman who is remembered as the woman in Sherlock Holmes' life. Welcome to Adventures in Compliance. Summary of the story. The story starts with Dr. Watson visiting Sherlock Holmes, only to find him engaged in a case. A masked man, later revealed to be the King of Bohemia, approaches Holmes at 221B Baker Street. The king is about to be married to a Scandinavian princess, but fears a past liaison with an American opera singer named Irene Adler could jeopardize his upcoming marriage. The scandal revolves around a photograph showing the king and Adler together, which the king believes Adler might use to cause a scandal. Despite the king's attempts to retrieve the photograph, Adler has refused to hand it over. The king hires Holmes to obtain the photograph without causing any scandal or alerting Adler. Holmes, with his astute observational and deductive abilities, impersonates a groom to gain information and then a clergyman to gain access to Adler's home. However, his plan to trick Adler into revealing the photo's location is foiled when a warning is raised about a fire, and Adler, in her concern, unwittingly reveals where the photograph is hidden. Holmes returns the next day to retrieve the photograph, but finds Adler, suspecting foul play, has fled with her new husband, Godfrey Norton, leaving behind a letter for Holmes and a photograph of herself. The letter reveals that she saw through Holmes' disguise and tricked him, but assures the king she won't use the photograph for blackmail since she is happy in her new life. Impressed by Adler's intelligence and wit, Holmes keeps the photograph as a memento and from then on refers to Irene Adler as the woman, a figure who, in his eyes, epitomizes the strengths and intellects of her gender. The king, relieved about the resolution, offers a reward, but Holmes rejects it, asking only for the photograph of Adler. This story introduces actually not one, but three characters. Obviously, Irene Adler as the woman, but it also is our first meeting of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Interestingly, Conan Doyle chose this story to explore Holmes' relationship with the woman. And I find it really interesting that he did this literally in the first story and doesn't do so again. How did Holmes feel about Irene Adler? Let's listen to what Dr. Watson says. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It is not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and particularly that one, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world had ever seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save a jibe and a sneer. Yet there was but one woman to him, and that woman was Irene Adler, of dubious and questionable memory. Very interesting description of how Holmes felt about Adler. But it's also interesting that the Duke himself also seems to have had something akin to admiration for Adler when he said, would she have not made an admirable queen? It is a pity she was not on my level. The interplay between the Grand Duke and Holmes are also most interesting, as Holmes, I won't say honors his position, but certainly understands his position and allows him to retain his dignity while Holmes fulfills his service and his duty to the Grand Duke. It's also interesting that Conan Doyle comes very close to having a fully formed character even in this very first story. It makes you wonder how long he had been thinking about this character in this series. And the action is also most interesting because we see Holmes in his role as with disguises, and disguised so well that he is not recognized literally face to face by Adler. Also, his use of subterfuge is introduced to us, misdirection, and we don't see the deductive reasoning that he is most famous for, but we see a very logical mind which allows him to analyze the situation and obtain, or at least put a plan in place to reobtain the photo which Adler obviously cherishes and takes with her. So what are some leadership lessons to be learned from this first Sherlock Holmes story? Number one, adapting to changing circumstances. In this story, Holmes was faced with a new and challenging case, and he adapted his strategies and methods to solve it effectively. Leaders should also be flexible and able to adapt to changing circumstances, obviously around business changes, but also when risks change, and that's something critical for a compliance professional. Number two, be strategic. Holmes used his strategic thinking to outmaneuver his opponent, the King of Bohemia, and solve the case. Compliance professionals should also have a strategic mindset and think ahead to anticipate challenges and opportunities. My colleague Stephen Martin often talks about a 1, 3, and 5-year plan for your compliance program. And that's a way for you to be strategic in your thinking while being tactical on a daily basis. Number 3, keep your word. In this story, Holmes kept his promise to the King of Bohemia, even when it was difficult, and he did not reveal the king's secrets. Compliance officers must also be honest and trustworthy and keep their promises, as the reputation you have as a compliance officer is probably your most valuable asset. You must not only be trustworthy in name and the way you say, but in the way you carry yourself. Number 4, and this is probably something we don't think about or talk about enough from the compliance perspective, but use your strengths. Sherlock Holmes used this as his exceptional deductive abilities and attention to detail to solve this case, and he relied on his strengths to succeed. Compliance professionals should also identify their strengths and use them. Obviously, a self-assessment can be incredibly helpful here, but understanding what your strengths are and playing to those, as well as understanding what your weaknesses are, is critical for a compliance professional. And number 5, maintain professionalism. Throughout this story, Sherlock Holmes maintained his professionalism, even in the face of personal challenges, and he did not let his emotions interfere with his work. Compliance professionals absolutely have to maintain their professionalism, even in difficult situations, and they should strive to remain calm and level-headed. Thank you so much for listening to this reboot of Adventures in Compliance. I'm really excited about getting the opportunity to reread all of the Sherlock Holmes short stories and the novels as well, and I hope you will join me in this exploration. If you have any questions or comments, I hope you will reach out to me. You can reach me at efoxlaw.com. I also hope you will subscribe or rate and review this podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. Finally, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan and would like to join me for an episode or two, please let me know. I'd love to have some fellow Holmesians join me on this Adventures in Compliance.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.